Welcome to On the Moneyline, a podcast by MMA Play 365. I'm Newsom, and I'm here to break down this weekend's event at UFC Vegas 64, which is headlined by a fight between Marina Rodriguez versus Amanda Lemos. Now, I'll be honest, I'm not a massive fan of the main event, but there are quite a few real good fun fights on this card that I'm really looking forward to, good stylistic clashes. So it's definitely a card that's interesting for sure. The main event just doesn't really do it for me, though, if I'm being honest. But before we get into the breakdowns, as always, there is going to be a Base AI recap from last weekend from our UFC prediction software. There was an absolute gem in there that was from an underdog as well, which I'm not sure has happened before. The gem being the one that breaks down the win-loss, the method of victory, and then the method of victory plus rounds as well. So make sure you check that out. That'll be on our Base AI playlist on our YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/MMA Play 365. But now straight into the breakdowns. That's why you're all here. The main event, we've got Marina Rodriguez versus Amanda Lemos. And from a stylistic perspective, this is an interesting fight because it's a fight that's got a very high probability of being won and lost on the feet. If there is a fighter that mixes in the wrestling and grappling, I would probably say maybe it's more likely to be Lemos. But honestly, when all's said and done, if there's a finish in this fight, or if the fight does go a full 5 rounds and we go to the scorecards, God forbid it, I do feel that it's going to be because of the striking. So if it's a finish, I feel like it's going to be a KO, TKO. And if it does go to the scorecards, like I've already said, I think it's because of either the volume or the damage that's landed throughout the 5 rounds. Now, this is where it gets interesting because I feel like Marina Rodriguez is the better technical striker, not by a massive amount, but I do think she's better technically, and I think she's going to have more volume as well, and I think she's just going to be the sharper, crisper striker. However, Lemos for me, I think is going to not throw as much volume or not land as much volume. I think she's going to be landing the harder, more powerful shots, and from that technical striking perspective, she's not a million miles away from Marina Rodriguez. And I mentioned being sharp and crisp, and actually Lemos can be really sharp. She can be really crisp. She herself, she does have a good variety of strikes on the feet. So I think it's going to be really close. But the one thing that worries me a little bit with Lemos is the fact that the Angela Hill fight, there was moments in that fight where she started really well. She was looking crisp and sharp, but she was just consistently letting Angela Hill back in that fight, and to the point where the fight was really close. And, you know, some argued that Angela Hill should have got the nod on the scorecards. But like I say, there was just moments in that fight where she did allow Hill back in a little bit. And when you look at Hill, the way she fights, her style, her striking style and abilities, Marina Rodriguez is just a better version of Angela Hill. So I'm kind of thinking, you know, if this was 3 rounds, I think I would give Amanda Lemos more of a chance of winning. But over 5 rounds, I think that Lemos's cardio is still a little bit of a question mark. I'm not saying it's a problem. I'm just saying that I'm just not sure. You know, it's this type of fight, if it does go into round 4 and round 5, that we're going to see the real cardio of Amanda Lemos against a good striker. So there's a few question marks on Lemos. I think if it was a 3-round fight, I would definitely, to be honest with you, I would have probably picked Amanda Lemos to win over a 3-round fight. But with it being 5 rounds, from what I've seen in tape, like I said, the Angela Hill fight, the fact that this fight is going to be relatively close anyway, and the volume and the striking ability, should those be advantages on Marina Rodriguez's side, which I think they are, I think Amanda Lemos is just going to have trouble being competitive enough to where she's going to start taking over the fight, and I just don't see that happening. So from a betting perspective, I do think that Amanda Lemos is absolutely the side. I think Marina Rodriguez at around a 2-1 favourite is not the right side, but I do think that Lemos is going to have some problems here with it being a 5-round fight and going further down the stretch, which I do assume that the fight's going to go further down the stretch. So for those reasons, I'm picking Marina Rodriguez to win this fight. And in the next fight, the co-main event, this is one of the better fights on the card, in my opinion. We've got Magny versus Daniel Rodriguez. Now, this fight should have actually happened a couple of weeks ago, and this was actually supposed to be a super quick turnaround for Daniel Rodriguez after he fought and beat Jinh. But during fight week of this fight's fight week, last time out, it was a fight that got cancelled and Rodriguez was pulled due to him getting a cut on his arm. I'm not sure whether it was from the Jinh fight, but the cut was infected, so he couldn't fight. They rebooked it. I'm glad they did, because it is a real good fight stylistically. And stylistically in this fight, you've got someone like Daniel Rodriguez, who He's a very forward pressure fighter. He's got good striking. He's got good power. He didn't quite let it go against Li Jingliang, but he did say afterwards, look, Li Jingliang was just hitting super hard. Every time he stepped forward, he felt like he was getting rocked by Li Jingliang. So I do feel that's one of these things, and I talk about it a lot when I break fights down, that can be something that really halts a fighter once they've got the respect and their opponents are hurting them. But then across from Daniel Rodriguez this time out, it's Neil Magny, and I'm not saying Magny doesn't have any power, but he's just not known for, for his knockouts, and that raw power on the feet is more known as a volume striker, someone that's going to just constantly just tip-tap shots in your face and have good movement and good speed. So I don't think this is a fight where Daniel Rodriguez is going to really be pinned backwards. I think he's going to be able to flourish moving forwards. And he's got to be careful in this fight, Daniel Rodriguez, because if Neil Magny does get this clinch game going and the wrestling game going, where he's just rinse and repeating takedowns, then it could look like a very easy win for Neil Magny. But the couple of things that's on the side of Rodriguez in regards to that path to victory for Neil Magny is Rodriguez is physically big and strong for the division, so being pinned against the cage, I'm just not convinced that there's going to be extended periods of time there. And if there is, then Neil Magny's got to consistently close the distance to be able to get into those clinch positions. And when he closes the distance against Rodriguez, I think Rodriguez is going to have zero respect for any danger coming at him in regards to power. So I feel like he's going to be able to fire hard shots back and pressure forwards. And with Neil Magny, he's always had this problem against this type of fighter. Ponzinibbio was a good example. Max Griffin, people talk about, Li Jingliang should have beaten Daniel Rodriguez. Well, arguably Max Griffin should have beaten Neil Magny in their fight. I watched that fight back and I did score it for Max Griffin, and Daniel Rodriguez is a better version of that. I think it's an interesting fight because I think if Neil Magny can get his game going, it's going to be an easy win for him. But if he doesn't get that easy win, I think it's going to be on the complete opposite end of the scale, and I think it'll be a very difficult fight for him. But I do think Rodriguez has got the tools to be able to deal with a style like Neil Magny physically, and being able to stylistically push forwards and make it a nightmare fight for Neil Magny. So for those reasons, I am going to side with Daniel Rodriguez to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Josh Parisian versus Chase Sherman, a fight up at heavyweight. In my opinion, it's one of these categories that I categorise as a low-level heavyweight fight in the UFC, obviously not a low-level MMA fight because they are in the best promotion in the world. So listen, there's no disrespect there. It's just from the heavyweight division perspective, I think these fighters are at the bottom of the quality of fighters that we've got in the UFC heavyweight division. And listen, these always make for interesting fights, and there's a reason why this fight is quite close on the betting lines as well. It's around at a pick'em, and I think both fighters are going to pose problems for each other. I don't think it's going to be an easy fight for either fighter. I think it's going to be a fight that's won and lost on the feet. I think if anyone does look for takedowns, I'm not even sure if anyone's going to look for takedowns. I think it's a fight that, like I said, if there's a knockout, if there's a finish, it's more likely to be a knockout due to striking. If it goes to a decision, it's because of the work that's been done on the feet. Will determine who's won and lost the fight. I kind of am siding with Chase Sherman, though, a little bit here. The reason being is I think he's going to be slightly faster. I think from a cardio perspective, he is very hit and miss, but if his cardio's on, then he's going to definitely have a cardio advantage over Josh Parisian. But like I said, the speed and the quality of the strikes that's going to be coming on Parisian is going to be greater than Parisian on Chase Sherman. And I just think that Chase Sherman's just going to have the edge in that speed and movement. That's going to allow him to flourish in the striking department a little bit better. And I think it's going to be one of those close fights. I definitely think Parisian's going to have his moments, who will like to push forward, who is probably going to be the bigger fighter in there as well, more physical. Does he try and grab a hold of Chase Sherman and pin him to the cages? That's more likely his path to victory. But like I said, the speed and the movement of Chase Sherman, I think, is going to play a big factor, and that should allow Chase Sherman to get up on the numbers, which should allow him to win the fight, give him the best chance of the knockout, and if the knockout doesn't happen, give him a good chance of winning on the scorecards too. So for those reasons, I'm picking Chase Sherman to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Tagir Ulanbekov versus Nate Maness. And I actually think that, listen, for a start, I've been a fan of Ulanbekov. I feel like a lot of people have given him a lot of shit over his last few fights, and I've not been convinced by him. I like Ulanbekov as a fighter. I think his kickboxing's good. I think his wrestling's there. His grappling's there as well. Sure, it didn't show last time out against Tim Elliott, but Tim Elliott's also a very good wrestler, and Tim Elliott's grappling is one of the toughest to deal with in that division. Like, even Mighty Mouse, when Mighty Mouse was people would call him Mighty Mouse the GOAT, and he was dominating the flyweight division and nobody could beat him. Even Tim Elliott came into the UFC from the Ultimate Fighter and gave him a very competitive fight, especially early on. Tim Elliott's a nightmare to deal with, so I don't think you can really judge Ulanbekov's grappling based on that and say it's not good, because, like I said, Tim Elliott's a difficult fighter to deal with. However, the one thing I will say about Nate Maness is a very tough fight for any fighter. He's a fighter that's very boxing heavy. You can tell that's where his predominant style is, but then he's been, he quote him, turned into a wrestler by his coaches, so he feels he can wrestle as well. And I just feel that Nate Maness he's got sneaky power as well, and he's big for the division. There's not going to be many 5'10" flyweights, in the UFC, and he's quite big as well. Like, he must have a difficult weight cut, because you can tell once he rehydrates, he's much physically bigger than his opponents, not in height, but just in thickness, and he does have that sneaky good power. So that's something that Ulanbekov's got to be careful. The one flaw with Ulanbekov is I do feel that he's a little bit hittable. That's a little bit of a worry here against Nate Maness, because, like I've just said, Nate Maness cracks hard, and if Ulanbekov does get hit by one or two really hard punches, it could either drop him, knock him out, or just change the course of the fight. However, I think from a stylistic perspective, we have seen Nate Maness have problems with this type of style. He can get taken down. If he's taken down and held down, then he doesn't really offer much off his back from a defensive grappling perspective. That's a huge concern here. And in regards to Ulanbekov, his takedowns are there. He is a fighter that will look for the takedowns, which does have good control on the mat. We've seen him handle Tim Elliott to an extent on the mat, as good as, what we've seen a lot of other fighters handle Tim Elliott. Then you look at the Alan Nascimento fight. Alan Nascimento is a beast grappler. And Ulanbekov, again, arguably some people might have scored that fight to Nascimento, but what I'm trying to get at is Ulanbekov was able to take him down and control him, and this is a good grappler. So if he takes Nate Maness down, I absolutely think Nate Maness is going to be controlled. I think Maness is going to struggle getting back up to his feet. I think Ulanbekov is a developing fighter, and I mean, look, he's going to have had preparations in this fight with the current UFC lightweight champion Islam Makhachev, the former UFC lightweight champion and arguably the greatest of all time Khabib Nurmagomedov, Abubakar Nurmagomedov, Umar Nurmagomedov, Usman Nurmagomedov. Like, the team that he's got around him is phenomenal. So if you think that he's not going to get better from fight to fight and be as best prepared as what he possibly can be as a fighter, I think you're crazy in thinking that. I think it's going to be an interesting fight, because Nate Maness, I do believe, has got the power and the ability to knock Tagir Ulanbekov out. I just feel if that knockout doesn't happen, then Ulanbekov is going to get the takedowns, is going to get the top control time. And I'm always going to side with the fighter that's more likely to do better down the stretch than the fighter that needs the early knockout. So for those reasons, I'm picking Tagir Ulanbekov to win this fight. And in the next fight, this is a fight that only got added last week, I believe. We've got Marco Madsen versus Grant Dawson. Short notice fight for Grant Dawson, who's stepping in to replace Marco Madsen's previous opponent. Off the top of my head, I can't remember who that is now, but that's the fight that we've got. And we've got wrestler versus wrestler here. I think that it makes it for an interesting fight, because obviously you've got Marco Madsen that really does implement his wrestling game when he tries to be dominant in his fights. His striking is getting better, and credit to him for that, but it's not very often that Marco Madsen's going to go into a fight and just completely and utterly light his opponent up on the feet striking. I feel that he does need the wrestling and grappling to be able to flourish in his fights. Or just look the best he can possibly look is the best way of putting that. But on the flip side, you've got Grant Dawson, and Grant Dawson's a phenomenal wrestler, and what makes Grant Dawson dangerous in this fight, and the reason why I completely understand that he's a favourite, even though the styles are very similar, is because Grant Dawson's grappling, I think, is much better than Marco Madsen's. And you look at the wrestling styles, Grant Dawson's got a very traditional wrestling style in regards to his single legs, his double legs, the fact he'll try and chain wrestle, where Marco Madsen's background is in the Greco-Roman wrestling, which is more upper body takedowns, and he's got that upper body strength. But when it comes to chaining takedowns on the cage, and you've got Grant Dawson dropping down, changing levels, I think you're going to see the difference in the wrestling there. And then on the flip side, if you've got Marco Madsen on top of Grant Dawson, I think Grant Dawson's going to have more of a chance of standing back up to his feet and not accepting those bottom positions and spending extended periods of time on the mat. Whereas on the other side with Marco Madsen, I could absolutely see Marco Madsen getting taken down and being stuck on his back. So the wrestling's interesting. I do slightly edge that towards Grant Dawson, but I definitely edge the jiu-jitsu to Grant Dawson as well. On the feet, I think it's going to be quite even. Both fighters are developing on the feet. Both fighters definitely, that's where their holes and flaws are in the game. So I think that's going to be quite even, but I just don't see Grant Dawson or Marco Madsen really wanting to try and win this fight on the feet. I think one of them's wanting to try and get the edge over the other in the wrestling and try and go first, offense, best form of defense type of thing. But I just feel Dawson's going to come out on top here. Like I said, a slight edge on the wrestling because of his wrestling style and the jiu-jitsu edge as well. So for those reasons, I'm picking Grant Dawson to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got the returning, a hyped fighter, Shayilan Almeida versus Maxime Grishin. Personally, a little bit annoyed about this fight. Grishin was supposed to fight Philippe Lins. I bet him as a -150 favourite, Maxime Grishin, that is. I think Grishin had a very, very comfortable fight ahead of him in that fight. I just didn't think Philippe Lins had much for him at all. And I was hoping they were going to rebook the fight after it, got scrapped on fight day. Yeah, I remember that now. It was fight day. It got bumped up to the main event because there was some problems with Philippe Lins. I'm guessing maybe a stomach bug or something that they tried to help him get over, and it just didn't happen. So very, very disappointed that they didn't rebook it. And Maxime Grishin's took a short straw here, in my opinion, because there is certainly not many fighters that are putting their hands up to fight Shayilan Almeida at this moment. And that's because Almeida's just an absolute beast. His striking is okay, can be a little bit robotic at times. You can make some reads on his striking, but the bottom line is you've just got to stop the takedowns, and then once you're on the mat, you've got to get back up to your feet, and those are the two issues. Shayilan Almeida, I believe, is going to be a better fighter at light heavyweight, but the dude at heavyweight looks like an absolute beast, and one of his biggest advantages as a heavyweight fighter is definitely the speed, because like I said, he's a little bit of a lighter heavyweight fighter. So with the speed, that's a problem because the entries into the takedowns are really fast, and again, it's really difficult for his opponents to make the reads and see those takedowns coming in. Like I said, because he's a lighter heavyweight, and everything that he does is quick, so that when the takedowns are quick, he gets the fight down to the mat, and on the mat, like, he's an absolute beast. He's just one of those BJJ aces. Like, nobody seems to be able to do anything against him on bottom. Very few fighters are able to stand back up to the feet, and if they do stand back up, they get taken straight back down. And once he starts his transitioning from position to position, is almost impossible to stop. I genuinely think that even at heavyweight, like I said, I feel like Almeida's going to be a better light heavyweight, but even at heavyweight, I feel like he could just absolutely cruise up into the top 10 in this division and still be a nightmare for the top 5 in the division as well, because when he's on top, he's just almost impossible to deal with. I've not got enough words to say about him that really justify how good he is. But in this fight with Maxime Grishin, same thing. I think Grishin's going to be the better striker. I think Grishin's going to be the more experienced fighter. But I think Grishin's going to get takedowns entered into him on his hips. I think Almeida's going to be able to take him down, and I think Grishin's going to have absolutely nothing for him on the mat. And even if that doesn't happen in round 1, which it probably will, but if it doesn't and Grishin does do well in round 1, Almeida's got round 2 and round 3 to work with. At some point, Almeida's going to get this fight down to the mat with a couple of minutes at least or more to work with, and I think that's going to be all she wrote. I find it difficult at this level in the UFC for any fighter to beat Almeida. I think if he beats Grishin, listen, it's time for a top 10, top 15 fighter for Almeida. Like, stop messing around outside of the rankings now. If he comes in here and gets a first round finish or a finish at all against Grishin, who is notoriously tough and difficult to beat, then like I said, it's a ranked fighter. It's a top fight next for Almeida. Otherwise, what are we doing here? But back to this fight, I'm picking Shayilan Almeida to win this fight. In the next fight, we've got Darrick Minner versus Shayilan Nuerdanbieke. And I think that this fight is going to be really, really fun. I think it's going to be fast-paced. I think we're going to see a lot of scrambling. I think Darrick Minner is going to be the one that makes this fight fun, though, because Nuerdanbieke's a little bit of a slower fighter, boxing, wrestler type of fighter, will look for the takedowns, has got decent jiu-jitsu, but also makes some mistakes on the mat as well, ends up getting reversed and put in bad spots, but then does some good stuff as well. And you can say the same for Darrick Minner. Darrick Minner's a little bit chaotic on the mat, and he can lose some positions from time to time. But I think that Darrick Minner's got an okay fight against him here. Like, he's not going to have everything his way. I think he's going to be outmatched physically from a strength and size perspective, power perspective. But I think once the fight starts hitting these wrestling scenarios, the scrambles, the grappling, I do think that Minna's going to have an advantage over Nuerdanbieke here. And I think Nuerdanbieke taking Darrick Minna down is going to be dangerous. Darrick Minna loves grabbing a hold of the guillotine, and he's very dangerous with it. If he doesn't get it, he can try and use it to sweep and reverse. And I think that Nuerdanbieke, with his style of fighting, is going to put him in danger with Darrick Minna. And Darrick Minna, the fight that he wants is he wants the guys to come forward. He wants that distance closed. He wants the wrestling and grappling scenarios. And I think Nuerdanbieke is going to give him exactly that. So I think it's a fight that Darrick Minna has got here that he's actually going to really enjoy. Whether he flourishes and how much he flourishes is a different matter, because it could be one of those fights where he's rinse and repeating the guillotine and Nuerdanbieke is escaping, and Darrick Minna is now just spending extended periods of time on his back and losing the fight. But like, with how fast he is with the scrambles, with his wrestling as well, I do feel the fight's going to be won and lost in those areas, and I just like the speed and the chaos of Darrick Minna opposed to Shayilan Nuerdanbieke's real raw wrestling abilities. So for those reasons, I'm picking Darrick Minna to win this fight. In the next fight, we've got Miranda Maverick versus Shanna Jinh. And I think it's a really difficult fight for Shanna Jinh, if I'm being honest. I think that Miranda Maverick's one of these fighters that is in one of these types of fights, that I just say from time to time when it happens that they've just got the advantage, the edge in every single area. I think Miranda Maverick's the better striker. I think she's the better wrestler. I think she's the better grappler. I think she's got the better cardio. I think she's fought the better level of competition and beaten better fighters than what Shanna Jing's beaten. And I just feel that Shanna Jing's in a real tough fight here. I think it's definitely a fight where Miranda Maverick can come into this fight, look good, flourish, put her name back on the map, and then really start to climb up the division a little bit. She was very hyped, last year, a couple of years ago. The hype sort of dropped a little bit after a few losses, but I think this is the platform, this is the fight where she gets back on top, she looks good, and people maybe start talking a little bit more about her, and then it's just a reset for her, if I'm being honest. And listen, I mean no disrespect to Shanna Jinh, but this is MMA, and I'm sure Shanna Jing's going to have some moments in this fight where she's looking good, but ultimately the quality that she's got against her in Maverick, I just feel that Shanna Jing's going to come short in every discipline of mixed martial arts, and that's the reason why Maverick should look the better fighter on the night. For those reasons, I'm picking Miranda Maverick to win this fight. And in the next fight, I think this is going to be a wild fight. We've got Mario Bautista versus Benito Lopez. Benito Lopez is a fighter that we haven't seen now in a couple of years, and he's a fighter that was actually really exciting. Maybe not a fighter that was ever going to set the world alight, that in regards to, is he a fighter that's going to break into the top 15, the top 10, but he's a fighter that's just super fun to watch. Now, he's also a youngish fighter as well. So what I mean by youngish fighter is, he's 28, he's not a young 20-year-old, but he's got very low mileage. He's 10-1, he's got plenty of years left, plenty of time left as well. And it begs the question, actually, of what has Benito Lopez been doing in this time off? Has he been developing? Has he been working? Has he had a few injuries to deal with? But even if he has had a few injuries to deal with, he'll still been able to develop his game over the last few years. So are we going to see a better version of him? Well, the thing is, with his style, he's very tall, he's very long, he's fast, he's got a good kicking game, he's explosive, he just likes to be in a firefight. And Mario Bautista is exactly the same. Bautista loves to be in a firefight as well. He's also fast, he's also got movement, he's also got good kicks, he's also got knockout power as well. So this is a real stylistic clash for the best reasons possible, because I feel like both fighters are a bit of a car crash. Both fighters are going to meet in the middle. If one fighter does decide that their game plan is to sit back a little bit and just wait to see what happens in the early moments, I think that's going to allow the other fighter to really push forwards and just create that chaotic fight anyway. So I feel like it's going to be a really good watch. It's going to be really entertaining. But with Benito Lopez being out for so long, with Bautista being active and getting some real good wins as well in the division, I do think that it's difficult to side with Benito Lopez because of that. I think Bautista's just on that form, he's on that run, he's been more active, and he's more likely to be more sharp and accurate and have the better game plan in this fight for those reasons. So I am picking Mario Bautista to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Jinh Frey versus Polyana Viana. And again, I think it's going to be a really close fight. I think Jinh Frey is the better put together mixed martial artist. I think she's more comfortable in more areas in the fights. However, with Polyana Viana, although I don't think she's as experienced or as technically sound as what Jinh Frey is, I think Jinh Frey is actually more reliable. I think that's a good word to use. I think she's more reliable as a fighter. But with Polyana Viana, I think she's more dynamic. So I think her striking is going to be a little bit faster. It's going to have a little bit more of an edge to it. Her grappling, she's got real good grappling. She's the type of fighter that will like the fights down on the mat. Even if she's on her back, she'll look for arm bars and triangles and just look to secure a submission off her back, which she has done on numerous occasions. And she's also beaten very good grapplers as well, submitted very good grapplers. So I think Jinh Frey is the more relaxed, more competent, comfortable, reliable fighter. But then you've got Viana that likes to make things happen, that's got more of an edge to her, that's more dynamic. And it's going to make for an interesting fight. But I am going to actually side with Polyana Viana in this fight, and the reason being is I just like that dynamic edge to her. I just like the fact that she'll try and make something happen, she'll try and be more aggressive, and I feel like either that's going to bring a finish for her, and if it doesn't bring a finish, I think the judges are going to like what they see in regards to that aggression and forward pressure. Although at this point, what do we know about the judges? But I do feel that Polyana Viana is going to have more of that edge in this fight. She's going to look hungrier, look more aggressive, and that should land her in better stead when all is said and done. So for those reasons, I'm picking Polyana Viana to win this fight. In the next fight, we've got Johnny Munoz Jr. versus Liudvik Sholinian. And Liudvik Sholinian coming back in after the fight against Jack Shawless, and that was a tough fight for Sholinian to come into his UFC debut against. I think he's clearly got a better fight ahead of him here than what Jack Shaw is. Jack Shaw's one of the best fighters in the division. But I do think that Sholinian's in a bit of a weird position here because although Sholinian's got a decent all-round style, he is predominantly a wrestler. I believe he was a Ukraine national wrestling champion. And you can see that he's got good wrestling, but the problem is he's got Johnny Munoz on the other side. And Munoz is a legit BJJ black belt, a multi-time IBJJF world champion, and does he really want to take Munoz down like we saw in Munoz's fight against Nate Maness? The commentators picked up on this as well in the third round after Johnny Munoz has really put some hard work in and was struggling to take Nate Maness down. In the third round, Maness got on top of Munoz when he was probably at his most tired, and straight away Munoz started, trying to scramble, throwing up submissions, ended up looking for a leg, trying to reverse positions, and that was in the third round. So I feel like Sholinian probably isn't going to want to wrestle too heavily here, or maybe he does, and that's his mistake, because I do think if he takes Munoz down, that's absolutely what Munoz wants. Then when you're looking at the striking on the feet, Munoz is a work in progress, granted, but he is looking better and better each time out. Sholinian's got decent boxing, but again, it's not super dangerous boxing, it's not long combinations, it's not big power, it's just more there for activity purposes. I think on the feet could be quite close, maybe even nullified a little bit, but then I wouldn't even be surprised to see Johnny Munoz take Sholinian down. And when Sholinian is taken down and settled on his back, he can have some problems getting back up to his feet because he's a wrestler, not necessarily a grappler, and there's a difference. Once you've got the takedown, you're then in the world of BJJ, not in the world of wrestling. So I think that Munoz has got quite a few advantages here. Not so much, like I said, in the striking, but in regards to how the fight plays out in the game plan, because he's almost going to completely take away the biggest strength of Sholinian, because his strength in the jiu-jitsu is greater than, not greater than the wrestling of Sholinian. It's just, once Sholinian takes him down, that's then in Munoz's world. Munoz can really dominate in that position. In those scenarios with the jiu-jitsu, whereas Sholinian can't really dominate in the wrestling, because once you've got the takedown, the wrestling's over. That's where I'm at with this fight. I think it's tough for Sholinian. So for those reasons, I'm picking Johnny Munoz Jr. to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got the return of Jake Hadley versus Carlos Candelario. Now, for me, this is the fight that Jake Hadley's got that's going to really make his statement in the UFC. This is the fight that he's going to look great in, and he's going to get people talking again. I bet against Jake Hadley in his last fight against Alan Nascimento, because Alan Nascimento, as I've already mentioned on this podcast in a previous breakdown, he's just an absolute beast of a grappler. And I just knew that Jake Hadley was going to have some problems with that level of grappler who's just so tricky to deal with. However, Carlos Candelario's got a good style in regards to an all-round style to be able to not only give Hadley a competitive fight, but also bring the best of Hadley out. And once he starts bringing the best of Hadley out, I think that's where Hadley's going to start dominating. I think Jake Hadley has actually got a good ceiling in the UFC. I genuinely think he can get into the top 10 of the division. We'll see from that point where he surges into the top 5, into the top here. But he's got decent wrestling. He's got a real good grappling game. He didn't get submitted by Alan Nascimento, and in fact, he had real good moments against Alan Nascimento, you know, threatening with his own submission. So I think Jake Hadley's got a bright future. I think he's a very good fighter, a fighter that's going to be developing over the years. He's still really young as well. And like I said, I just feel that Carlos Candelario's in a tough fight here because I think Hadley's going to be the better striker, the more dominant striker. I think his wrestling and grappling's going to be better as well. So I think Carlos Candelario, it's a tough fight for him. He might have some moments in this fight, maybe early on. Like I said, he's got a decent all-round game, but I think Jake Hadley's going to really thrive in this fight and look really good. So for those reasons, I'm picking Jake Hadley to win this fight. And finally, the last fight of this episode of the podcast, the last breakdown, we've got Ramona Pascual versus Tamires Vidal, the newcomer. And I think this is actually going to be quite a close fight. You know, watching tape on Vidal, she's got a Muay Thai background. She's got good jiu-jitsu, it seems, as well. Really opportunistic with that jiu-jitsu also. And I think Ramona Pascual is a fighter that has struggled a little bit on the feet. She is tall and she's big for the division, but she's fighting women that she really wants to take down to the mat. And if that's the case in this fight, then I think that she's going to give probably Vidal the fight that Vidal wants as well. And I think that's what's going to make this fight close. Vidal, I think, is going to be outmatched physically here. Like I said, I think Pascual's going to be a little bit bigger, a little bit stronger. But I also think Vidal is the better fighter from a technical perspective. I think her striking's a little bit better. Even though she's not got the strength advantage, that means that she'll likely have a speed advantage. I think that from a jiu-jitsu perspective, Vidal is probably going to be the slightly better jiu-jitsu player as well. But ultimately, it's one of those fights that does leave a lot of questions, that does leave things lingering in regards to how Vidal actually approaches this fight. Is Pascual actually a lot better than what we think? It's just she struggled against two better fighters that were in good stylistic fights as well. So it's going to be interesting to see how the fight plays out. It's a real difficult one to break down, but I do think that, again, Vidal is going to be the slightly better striker who's got the speed advantage. I think if the fight hits the mat, she's more likely to be the better grappler. I think Pascual's probably going to be the better wrestler with the physical advantage. So again, it's going to be a fight that plays out quite close, but I am going to side very slightly towards the newcomer who's making a UFC debut, and I'm picking Tamires Vidal to win this fight. And that's all for this episode of the podcast at UFC Vegas 64. As always, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. If you do like the content that I provide, if you do have success with cash-in betting tickets, if I help you with the breakdowns and analysis, please just do me a favor and just hit that subscribe button. We are trying to get to 1,000 subscribers on our YouTube channel. We really appreciate the likes to the video as well. Aside from all that good stuff, I'm Newsome. Thanks for listening. We'll see you again next week.